What was the scariest, we need to leave now, gut feeling that you've ever experienced? Story 1. Surfing a fairly secluded reef break, offshore across a channel. This place is in a very southern state of Australia. Overcast weather, but still amazing. Day for the waves. I was surfing with only one other guy. We were trading waves and getting to know each other in between sets. I asked what he did for a living, and he was a marine biologist. We'd both recently moved to the area and were new to surfing it as well. Despite it being extremely good surf, after 40 minutes he says, "I don't like this, something feels off, I feel like I'm being watched, like I'm bait." I didn't want to leave as it was excellent surf, but this guy was a marine biologist, so I took his instinct as a sign to play it safe. We paddled back across the deep channel together as quickly as we could without panicking, and walked the 15 minutes. Tracked back to the car park talking shit the whole way. I got his mobile number for future surfs together, given how small town it is here and not knowing anyone. We noticed a 15 feet inflatable boat pull up near the reef and hang around for a bit without much thought. Later that night, while looking at my social media, I read about 3 fishermen at the same location we were at that morning, at the same time in their boat. As they pulled up to check their cray pots on the beach side of the reef, they were circled twice by a great white shark that was as big as their boat. That guy most likely saved me from a horrible experience that day. I messaged him with the link to the Facebook page with the comments regarding their experience. Chills ran through my body for a good 20 minutes. He was adamant he felt the presence of something, and he was right. Story 2. Viewing to see a flat that didn't exist. Not my story, but one my mom told me from her 20s when she was living and working in London, UK. I'll do my best to retell it. Also, I'm dyslexic, so apologies in advance for grammar. This story always gives me the creeps, though, when I think about it. So back in her 20s, my mum was living in London and looking to move into a slightly bigger place. She'd found a really good price for a flat slightly out from the area she was hoping. She'd called the agent to book a viewing, and that's when things turned odd. So, the guy booking the viewing started asking weird requests and questions, such as to bring her passport, her age, race, and physical appearance. Would she be coming on her own? Did she have a car, or would she be getting the bus? He was very persistent that she should arrive by bus, as it would be easiest for her, explaining it was a straight road down from the bus stop to the apartment block. Obviously quite unnerved by this call, but still interested because the flat looked ideal. She and my dad, who were dating at the time, decided to check the exterior and surrounding area. The day before the viewing, they drove there, first passing the bus stop he was indicating her to arrive with. From the bus stop, there was about 150,200 meters of derelict wasteland that she would have to walk past to get to the flat, and, standing at the end of the street in the location this apartment block should have been, was a huge abandoned building. Smashed, broken windows, graffiti, no entry signs. Definitely nothing inhabitable in sight. Still, when she tells this today, you can see how much it rightly shook her. Of course she didn't go to her viewing. However, she informed the police, advising them of the planned time and place. From what she saw, from following up with them, they didn't appear to take this tip seriously, and little was done. A couple years later, though, while in a pub with some friends, she gets chatting to a guy she just met through mutual friends that night. He was in the police, and through conversation, her story came up. He said that that area at the time of her viewing had a huge human trafficking problem. Still gives me chills. Story 3. When I was about 8 in 1985, an old El Camino pulled up alongside my friend and I, with a man saying he knew my mom. He did know her name, but something felt off, so I grabbed my friend and ran. When we told my mom, she went white and called the cops. Turns out this guy thought my mom had stolen his job at the steel mill she worked at the time and wanted to hurt her. He already had a warrant out for nearly killing his wife that morning. When I was 16, my mom had a terrible feeling about an outing some friends and I were going on. Hindsight being 20/20, it was a stupid move for me to go anyway, but I did. Long story short, there was a car accident, my 2 best friends died, and nearly so did I. It'll be 30 years in November. I still regret getting in that car every day. My friends might still be alive if I hadn't. More recently, I was at our other house in the country with my oldest son and his wife and kids. There was a break in the storms, and my son decided to go home instead of spending the night. I was filled with dread at the thought of them going home so late, since we were dealing with intermittent but severe storms. So much dread that I started crying and begging them not to leave. Thankfully, they agreed. We all started home the next morning with them following me and my husband. We came up on this stretch of road that we know has no lights at night to see police barricading a washed-out bridge and cranes retrieving cars. We all piled out of our cars to ask the officers what happened. Apparently, there were several cars that had kept going, not knowing the bridge was out. The lone survivor in the first car had told the police that they went off the bridge at about 9:30 p.m. That's about the time my son wanted to leave. My husband just looked at me, and my boy hugged me extra tight because he knew what could have happened. Story 4. After graduating undergrad, I was working as a caseworker for individuals with developmental disabilities and got assigned a new case for a young man who had autism and severe behavioral concerns. I met him at his grandmother's house since she had custody of him since his parents weren't around. I think mom was in prison. Met this young man who was probably about 6 foot and weighing around 250 pounds, but had the developmental capacity of a 5-year-old child with a hairpin trigger temper. The house he was living in was absolutely destroyed, with the other piece of furniture that was not smashed up was an oversized beanbag chair in the living room. Grandma gave up trying to send the kid to school since he would absolutely destroy the place if he was forced to go. Grandma was no peach, but I felt for her and wanted to help. One of the meetings I was having with them, the kid and Grandma seemed especially tense, like pacing around the room and smacking the walls. After about an hour of trying to get stuff done, and realizing that it was not going to happen on this trip, it happens in this line of work, I decided to call it since the kid was becoming more and more agitated. Grandma was annoyed I would have to come back again, but we scheduled for a week or so out and left my business card with a reminder of the appointment. I leave to go back to my home state for a few days, and when I get back, I get called into my supervisor's office. I guess the night I left, the kid had a complete breakdown and beat his grandmother to death. No one noticed until the kid came wandering outside after a day or two covered in blood. I probably missed everything by less than 3 hours. Story 5. Years ago, when I was still living at home with my parents, I drove home around 2 a.m. As I parked my car, I noticed a man walking down the street. I decided to wait until he passed my car and was far enough for me to get out. However, instead, he passed my car and hid behind the van that was directly parked behind me. I guess he did not think I was paying attention to him, so I called my dad, who was asleep, to come down and get me. He did, and when the guy saw my dad, he immediately ran away. I was lucky. Story 6. Years ago, before cell phones, I was driving home from dropping my husband at the train at 4:30 a.m. Only me and one other car on the road. He started turning where I turned twice, so I didn't go home. I went to an all-night gas station and called the police. I gave them a description of his car. 3 weeks later, he was arrested. Turns out, he was following women home and driving past their house and doubling back to grape them. No one had noticed his car. I'm glad I paid attention. Story 7. Me and my little sister went camping in the woods very close to our house when we were kids. We'd seen this bald guy with a blue shirt and a dog walking around, which isn't unusual for the area. You'll often see people walking and saying, "Hello." For some reason, though, I just got this tight feeling in my chest, and my sister must have too, because we both just gave each other this look. I don't know what it was that made me do it. This is very out of character for me. But I took a photo of the back of him as he was walking away. A while later, we see the same guy again near the lake. He comes over and asks about the tent we're carrying, where we'll be setting up, and are we camping with our dad? We say yes, we're just going to see him now. A lie. We must have had the same moment of psychicness because we walked off up a fork in the path until we were out of view, then looked at each other and jumped down a path hidden by the bushes and waited behind them on the parallel trail for a bit. The guy watched us walk off, pretended to play with his dog until he couldn't see us, then turned around and ran up the path after us. Thankfully, he didn't see us hidden and carried on up straight where he thought we'd gone. We decided camping was a bad idea and went home. That evening, my mom showed us a post in the local residents group which was a picture of the same bald guy trying to break into someone's house. Apparently, he'd just been walking around trying people's front doors and claimed to be a repair guy when he was stopped. I dread to think what his intentions were, but it was very lucky me and my sister knew those woods so well, otherwise we wouldn't have thought to go down one of the hidden paths. Story 8. I was around 10 or 11 years old and had been invited to a sleepover. My mom didn't really like me going to those because I'd usually end up staying up way too late and then being cranky the whole next day. When she dropped me off, she told me her usual send-off of, "Just remember, if you want to leave, I will come get you. It doesn't matter what time it is, just call me." The sleepover party itself was the usual routine. We watched a movie, gossiped, prank called some boys, this being before cell phones and caller ID, broke out the Ouija board, etc. It turned out that the girl hosting the sleepover had an older brother, high school aged, who also had some friends over. I remember they stood in the doorway of the rec room where we were, and something about them made my blood run cold, and I just remember thinking, I'm going to go home. I went upstairs and asked to use the phone, saying I wasn't feeling well and needed to go home. Her mom at first told me no and then berated me for being a baby, but I just kept saying that I needed to call my mom, and I still remember the feeling I had that I needed to leave. Finally, I was allowed to use the phone. My mom came to get me, and we swung by Dairy Queen on the way home. My mom was always cool like that. And I still remember the huge feeling of relief I had when she pulled up and I hopped into her car. Years later, I found out that the brother and/or his friends had molested some of the girls at the sleepover while they slept. No one reported it at the time, and I think it actually took years for any of the girls to compare notes and find out that they weren't the only one this had happened to. I feel bad that that happened to them, but still glad that I listened to my gut and got the hell out of there. Story 9. I was in Taco Bell with my daughter, and I saw a guy come in and back out with a t-shirt over his hand. I told her to dump her tray and get moving. We went out to the car quickly and left. Found out later on the news that the guy robbed the place with the gun hiding under his t-shirt. Story 10. Back in 2019, me, my husband, and 2 girls aged 6 and 9 were on a road trip in the South. We had booked an apartment in Atlanta through Airbnb, without knowing the neighborhood at all. It was bad, really sketchy, with a lot of creepy-looking people hanging around. We went into the apartment, and immediately my 6-year-old said, "I don't like it here." The door didn't lock properly. The beds were dirty, there was rotting food in the fridge, and the bathroom had not been cleaned in ages. My husband called the owner, who was furious and refused to give us a refund. To de-escalate the situation, my husband offered to not leave, a negative review if we could just get our money back. The owner agreed, but asked us to wait for him so that they could talk about it in person. As soon as he hung up, I told my husband that we needed to leave, now. We hurried to the car, and as we pulled out of the parking garage, we saw the owner driving up with 4 friends. He didn't see us, and we bolted out of there. Ended up at a hotel on the 14th floor, didn't even feel safe at street level.